is Tamira. Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Tamira Johnson. I'm a doctoral intern up at the Counseling Center here at Texas State. So today I'll be talking about boundaries and assertive communication. So thank you all for joining me. So I'll go ahead and get started. So this is just an overview of what I'll be talking about today. Boundaries, why they're important, different types of boundaries and like the context in which they occur, assertive communication, styles of communication, but we'll mainly be focusing on assertive communication. We'll do like a self-assessment. Hopefully I can get you all engaged and try to figure out maybe like what your typical boundaries are, and then some scenarios that we can go through. All right. So what are boundaries? So boundaries are limits that we set for ourselves. And it determines like the level of comfort we have with people, and it really guides our interactions with other people and set those limits. And they don't have to be communicated to exist. Sometimes there's boundaries that aren't communicated, but it doesn't mean that they're not important. And so we all have our lines of discomfort. And so like personal boundaries are more likely to be violated if they aren't communicated. So it's important to communicate those boundaries if you can. Why they are important. One reason is so you don't get taken advantage of. If we say our family, if we don't have boundaries with our family, they can maybe overstep in certain situations. Maybe you have different boundaries that are at work versus your personal life. Those might look different. And so you just really want to communicate those, right? So you don't get taken advantage of. Also to avoid burnout. So say you're at work and maybe you're assigned a lot of tasks and duties. If you're not communicating like, hey, maybe this is too much for me, then you risk you risk the getting burnt out and taken advantage of as well. So those kind of overlap. And that can result in like physical exhaustion, chronic stress, if it's like long-term. And then why you may need to set boundaries, or when you need to set boundaries. Again, if you notice yourself being burnt out, that's a sign that you might need to set boundaries. If you notice that you're feeling resentful of others, maybe you're getting upset, like, okay, maybe I'm saying yes to all these obligations and requests that are not necessarily in line with your boundaries, or your values, then that might be a sign that you need to set those. Another example too is like if you're at work and you're starting to take work home, that might be another sign you might need to set those boundaries as well. So different categories of boundaries. There's emotional, which are when you're sharing your feelings, it's reasonable to expect others to be supportive and listen to you and validate you. And so if there's not any boundaries, say with a friend, and they are like constantly invalidating you or belittling you, that's a sign that they've crossed your emotional boundaries, right? So those are important to protect your emotional well-being. Physical boundaries are boundaries that are protecting your physical space. And so that can consist of like physical touch. You may not want maybe like a coworker to touch you or to hug you, right? Because that's your personal boundary in a professional setting. Sexual, these are important to protect your needs and safety around sex. And so again, that kind of overlaps with like the physical, with touching, making sexual comments, or engaging in just sexual, comments without express consent. It can also consist, that can lead into violence or sexual abuse if those boundaries aren't communicated. not to say they need to be communicated all the time for others to respect your boundaries. But it's better to communicate those if you can to protect yourself. Again, those workplace boundaries, protecting our ability to do our work without interference or drama. So that's really important. Material, protecting our personal belongings. I know at the counseling center, we hear a lot about maybe roommate situations where there's conflict and maybe conflict over, shared space or different things you might share, or roommate maybe eating your food without your permission. So that's just an example of setting those boundaries around your personal property. And then time, protecting the use and misuse of our time. And so this is important because this is going to help you to manage your time better, and also set boundaries around how you allow others to use your time, and how you deal with favor requests and how you structure your free time. All right. So different types of boundaries. So porous boundaries, those are where you might overshare personal information. So you might meet someone instantly and just feel the need to just divulge and just share all the personal information and secrets about yourself. This might be where you're dependent on the needs of others, accepting of abuse or disrespect, and fear of rejection if you don't comply with their requests. So that would be like an example of porous boundaries, right? They're not really in place, and they're just kind of wide open. If you think of like a fence, I like to think of the analogy of like a fence. It's where it's just kind of freely open, right? There's no lock, and it's just kind of allowing any and everything to kind of come in there. So rigid boundaries would be, these tend to display themselves as like avoiding intimacy and close relationships. One might be very maybe protective of their personal information, so they might not be sharing a lot of information at all. They might seem detached in relationships and then keep others at a distance to avoid rejection, right? So these are like the fence is really locked. It's closed. Nothing's coming in, nothing good is coming in, and nothing's coming out. Like it's just very rigid. And then healthy, which is what we aspire to have, is where you value your own beliefs, opinions, and your values. You're not compromising on your values, right? Because when we do that, that's when that resentment can possibly build. Knowing your personal wants and needs is important. Sometimes we're not really clear on what we're wanting and needing. And if we don't, then it's hard to articulate that to others, right? Because they're not mind readers and they're not able to know what we're needing in those moments. Respecting others' boundaries when they say no, right? So it's a two-way street with healthy boundaries. You want to respect the people in your lives' boundaries, and if you're going to expect them to respect yours, right? So respecting each other, sharing personal information appropriately. So not under, sharing or oversharing, but it's reciprocal, right? Relationships are reciprocal. So it's two people sharing information at an appropriate time because relationships take time to build. So these are some examples of healthy and porous boundaries. So here's like a few quotes and scripts that are typical in healthy boundaries, right? So if someone's maybe requesting that you, go to dinner with them, and if you have plans, saying, I can't attend dinner tonight as I have other matters to attend to. Another one is, I have work to do this evening, so I'm sorry I can't help you move. I don't feel comfortable talking about that situation with you. So I think this is probably a pretty maybe common one that can come up. I know sometimes there can be people in our lives that want to call and maybe vent and just kind of dump on you, and maybe you're not in a space to listen. Um, and so this would be a good time to say, I don't feel comfortable talking about that situation with you, or I don't feel comfortable um, with, or I don't have the mental capacity to listen to you dump right now or vent. I don't like it when you yell. If you continue to yell at me, I'm leaving. So a really good boundary to set if you're arguing with someone and things are escalating. I would rather watch another movie, so I'm not going to go to the theater. I hope you have fun, right? And so boundaries don't necessarily have to be like mean or aggressive. I think people tend to think that boundaries are inherently mean by saying no, but it's not. It's just you communicating your boundaries in an assertive way. Um, Porous boundaries. So again, these are the ones where you might, rigid boundaries aren't in place, nor is it really healthy, but they're allowing things to kind of get into your space, right? And so you might say, if you have a porous boundary, of course I'll go to dinner tonight. It's not like I had other things to do anyway, right? When you might have really had plans and you really don't want to go, but you're gonna appease this person's request. Um, my back has been hurting, but I'll help you move. I do anything to help you out, right? Um, so this person is ignoring the fact that they're physically hurting and could be putting additional stress on their body and injuring themselves um, to help this person out. I'll tell you what happened later this evening, right? Maybe someone is, trying to get information and trying to figure out maybe a situation you were in, right? And so again, appeasing that person. I understand you're angry. I deserve this, right? So, this one's really taking the ownership on or taking the blame um, when the situation might not even be their fault, right? Um, I don't want to watch this movie, but I'll go anyway. And so you can clearly see, these are some examples of maybe what a healthy boundary would look like and what a porous boundary would look like. All right. So I was hoping we could do like a self-assessment as an activity to maybe see, which ones stand out as these different categories of boundaries, whether they're porous, rigid, or healthy. So the first one is, I think there's a typo. I say yes to a person when I want to say no. So A, I do that often. B, I say no and tell people when I'm saying no that they don't ask me anymore. Um, I usually say no without apologizing or lying about it. So if anyone feels comfortable sharing maybe which one you tend to say or which one you're more inclined to say in this situation. Hey, yeah, do that pretty often. Yeah, yeah, I do as well. Right. Like sometimes I want to set those healthy boundaries, but they're really hard, especially when we don't want to disappoint our loved ones, right? And maybe they really do need our help. And so we might say yes when we really want to say no. Right? What about number two? I feel like I'm constantly having to save people close to me and fix their problems. So A, no, I don't get involved in other people's issues. B, yes, often. C, no, I know my limitations and offer what I can when I can. Okay, yeah. Yeah. B, yeah, right. So A might be an example of maybe like more rigid boundaries. B would be like more porous boundaries. And then C would be an example of like a more healthier boundary, right? Which can be really hard to set, right? Is, you You have to know your limitations. And, the other layer is being able to communicate that in a confident way. Um, and not really have that fear that you're going to disappoint, your loved ones or others. Right. I regularly find myself sucked into pointless fighting or debating. A, yes. B, no, I don't experience that. C, no, I try to keep people at a distance. Mhm. Yeah.
And but for like for other people's, I think often brought in kind of like the mediator for others.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tricky one when you're like on the outside of the drama. And then maybe, yeah, they're asking you to be the mediator. Um, but then it's like, do you feel comfortable being the mediator, right? Do you have boundaries around that? Maybe both parties, maybe you're on both sides, right? Maybe you can understand both sides of the issue. So that kind of makes it more complex. Yeah. And you might not want to disappoint either or. Um, then, if you have a tendency to maybe people please, this is really common in like having that difficulty setting those boundaries. It's like, okay, um, do I have a fear of being, abandoned, or a fear of being disliked if I, um, say no, you know? So yeah. So yes, might be an example of like a porous boundary because you're constantly, involved in these fights and debates. No, um, could be a healthy boundary, right? B and C, you can kind of take those either way. No, I try to keep people at a distance. That would be an example of maybe like a more rigid boundary. Um, because we need relationships, right? And we have to create that intimacy if we want healthy relationships. Um, but it can be scary kind of putting ourselves in those close relationships if we fear that there's going to be, issues or conflict, which are a normal thing, right? In relationships, there's, you know, always going to be like disagreements or conflicts. It's just like, how can we resolve that and communicate and respect each other's boundaries at the same time? And so if we keep people at a distance, then we're not able to create those healthy relationships that we might want in our lives. I loan money to friends or family out of feelings of pity, guilt, obligation, or being threatened. A, yes. B, no. I loan money with clear expectations of when I'd like to be paid back. C, no, I don't trust people and or I want to hold on to every penny I earn. So, yeah, yeah.
They aid primarily maybe guilt and obligation. So I'm not asked often because I'm a student.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And those emotions can definitely play a part in, guiding our behaviors in our boundaries, right? If we feeling overwhelming guilt all the time, um, then we're probably going to have those more porous boundaries. We're going to just kind of let people, not purposely, right? Well, we might be putting ourselves at risk for being taken advantage of more often than if you had healthy boundaries. So, um, no would, I mean, B would be an example of a healthy boundary. And then C would be obviously a more rigid boundary, right? right? That distrust and really not allowing yourself to be in relationship with other people and help other people out. So this is a really tough one, right? Because I think there's always times when we have family and friends that are in need and need help, um, and we want to help them, um, but no one really wants to be taken advantage of, right? We want to be able to give, but we want it to be reciprocal as well. It's another one. I frequently feel stressed about work. So A, yes. B, no. I never think about work. When I'm off, I check out and don't care what happens. C, no. I turn off work notifications and ignore calls, texts, or emails. I try to be present with my friends, family, and self once I'm home. There are some situations when I might be a little flexible in case of an emergency, but I make sure I don't get sucked into it for too long. So, any of these come up for any of you? Yeah. See. Yeah. So yeah, A might be a porous boundary. Um, B might be more rigid. C would be an example of a healthier boundary. It's really hard though. It's really hard, especially, jobs. That's how we make our living and pay bills. And so we kind of feel like that pressure and obligation to maybe overperform and be maybe too available. And even though you're getting paid, um, there still need to be some boundaries in place so that you're not being overworked or exploited. Yeah. I've kind of had to learn how to do that as well throughout my career, and it really makes a difference, right? You have a little more energy when you're able to say, um, this is my time, and take back your time and set those boundaries, and um, maybe not bring work home if you can help it. If you need to catch up, then that's pretty normal. Um, but if you're like always maybe spending your weekends catching up on work, and then that might be a sign that you're leading to burnout, and there need to be some more boundaries in place. I think I spend too much time on social media. I think we're all kind of probably struggling with this one. A, yes. B, no. I enjoy checking in on social media once in a while, but I don't get lost in it. C, I log into my social media account for work on specific days and times. Then I log out of the app and on my phone. So, any of you struggle with this one?
It's only because I'm on a social media fast because I'm trying to be productive.
Yeah. 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 This is a tough one. I think I need to go on a fast as well. But right, we don't think about, I don't think it's really common to think about the boundaries we have maybe with technology and social media. We might think of it, in terms of people, work, and those relationships. But sometimes it can be literally with, other things that might be distracting us from engaging in maybe things that are more important to us. Maybe um, we need to do homework, but we're on social media for hours and on TikTok, right? Time can pass really quickly when we're distracted. And so, um, maybe your homework or maybe your grades are, being impacted negatively. So that might be a sign that a boundary need to be set around that. Um, Maybe other responsibilities are being neglected. Maybe you're not cleaning your place as much. Maybe I hope no one's doing this, but maybe you're not making it to work on time. You never know. But being able to say, hey, okay, this is being negatively impacted. I might need to set a boundary here in my life, right? And that can be with maybe spending money. I know I have boundaries around that. Like, okay, maybe I can't go out this weekend because I really need to save. And so kind of putting um, more value into other things you want to do in your life or that are important. Right. So here's the scenario. Your mom calls and asks you to go shopping with her on Saturday. You already have plans to hang out with your friends for the entire day. Would you A, tell her yes and cancel plans with your friends to avoid disappointing her? B, tell her that you have plans and suggest another day? Or C, tell her that you're not available? Which one would y'all be inclined to do? B? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Y'all are good. That's a healthy boundary, right? Y'all are okay with telling mom, like, hey, I got plans with my friends. We're gonna have fun and turn up. So we'll do that another day. Yeah. That can be really hard, right? Maybe you're shopping for something very important. Maybe mom wants to go shopping for a birthday gift for dad. So it can be really complex, right? And it can be hard to say, especially if it's not modeled for us, because we learn a lot from how we're raised. And if those boundaries are not modeled, and maybe we had parents that overstepped our boundaries, even as children. I think we tend to think that children don't have boundaries, but they do, right? Because they're people. And so in turn, we kind of, observe that, and then we receive messages, and we kind of go through life, for the rest of our lives that way. If we're not, maybe more aware of it, and you probably won't be aware of it until maybe there's an issue, or maybe you're burnt out, or maybe you're being taken advantage of. Right. All right. Your boss asks you to do additional duties that are not a part of your job duties. He tells you that he will give you extra time off if you do, but you're feeling overwhelmed. Would you tell him yes and bite your tongue to avoid creating tension? B, tell him no, and that you're upset that you're being asked to do other duties. C, tell him that you're overwhelmed today and maybe next week. Which one would y'all be inclined to do? Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think A, right? It's pretty hard. Um, it's pretty hard to tell someone who is above you, right? Your boss, your supervisor, that you're feeling overwhelmed, because we likely have a fear of being, you know, evaluated in a negative way. And so if they're doing your evaluations, you might fear that if you say that you're overwhelmed, then maybe they think that you can't do the job, right? You might fear that you're going to be fired or reprimanded in some way. Um, but it's also important to have those boundaries at work as well, right? And to kind of know when you're being maybe pulled into different job roles that are maybe not necessarily a part of your job duties, right? Which can happen frequently, you know. All right. And so, we kind of talked about boundaries in different scenarios and different types of boundaries. So now we're going to talk about communicating those boundaries. And it's important to really be assertive when you're doing that. And so assertiveness is just a communication style where a person stands up for their own needs and beliefs, while also respecting the needs of others. So it's defined by, mutual respect, diplomacy, and directness, right? And so I think this one gets conflated with aggressiveness, um, which are two different things, right? Aggressive comes off as maybe intimidating or threatening. Anger is typically displayed, right? When you're maybe communicating in an aggressive way. Um, in contrast, passive communication might be related to those maybe more porous boundaries, right? And you might allow more things and disrespect than you would if you had more healthier boundaries. So really being assertive when you're communicating, what your limits are. And so one of the first steps for assertiveness is to be clear and state what your needs and wants are. Um, you know, you want to mind your tone, right? To avoid being aggressive. Because people are gonna miss the message or miss your communication or what you're communicating if you're coming off in a way that's really aggressive. And so just really being clear, not using really complicated words or jargon. Um, but just really being clear and stating what your needs and wants are. Again, being direct, directly state your need or request, or just say no, right? Like in some of these scenarios, right? Some of the responses were, no, I can't do that. And that's okay. You don't always have to provide a reason, right? That can be helpful, especially with our loved ones, when we're in relationships, it's nice to know, like this is why I'm setting the boundary so that they have that information and not wondering, what's going on. Um, so don't just mention what you don't like, right? Ask for what you need and what you want, and identify your expectations, or decline the offer or the request. Um, and then step three, it's really important to appear confident when you are communicating these boundaries. Um, if they're coming across maybe in a passive way, the person on the other end might not be, they might not take you seriously. They might say, okay, that's not really a boundary, right? Maybe that's something that, um, that I can cross or get away with. Um, so that's really important. Um, it's also really important, I want to add too, is that oftentimes we set boundaries, but we don't enforce them, right? And so it's important to be consistent with those boundaries because, um, right, we want the other person to learn how to interact with us and how to relate with us. And so if we are doing inconsistent boundaries, um, then they're going to be confused on the other end of like, okay, well, sometimes you allow me to do this and sometimes you don't. So I really don't know, um, you know, what's important to you and what's not, what your limit is. So it's really important to be consistent with that boundary if you can, right? And sometimes we don't uphold those boundaries all the time, which is fine, right? No one's perfect. I don't do it either. Um, but you want to be as consistent as you can, just so that um, eventually that is the expectation, right? And then hopefully there won't have to be like a constant conversation about what the boundaries are because they're going to be expectations now. And I also want to note that you really feel really uncomfortable setting boundaries. It's hard. It's hard to be assertive and say, and risk the other person getting upset. Um, but in that moment, it's important to think about, am I more worried about them getting upset in their mood, or am I more worried about my limits and my needs and wants? Okay. So some other tips is just to respect your needs and wants and ask for what you need. Using I statements is really helpful also in those moments. Remaining calm when articulating your needs. So again, not yelling, threatening, or shaming the other person. Um, Also make a plan on what you're going to say. So creating a script can be helpful. If you need to write it out, practice in the mirror. I know it sounds silly, but it can be really helpful. Practice with a friend if you are maybe kind of worried about communicating your boundaries with someone else, where it might be very difficult, right? You might be communicating a boundary with the supervisor, You want to practice that. So that might be helpful. Saying no if needed, right? And not really beating around the bush. So being really direct, like, no, I can't do that. And also don't lie about the reasons that you're setting the boundary or lie about why you're saying no, right? Let them know, like, that's a limit that I've set for myself and I don't feel comfortable doing that. So no. Making eye contact, right? So again, that's helpful in appearing confident in that step we talked about, being confident, maintaining eye contact so that they are, receiving what you're saying and taking it seriously. And then listening, because it is reciprocal, right? Listening to others without making interruptions, right? So allowing them to have, you know, um, their say as well, or expressing their opinion and listening to them, right? Because you want them to listen to you as well, right? So they might be communicating their boundaries in that situation. And so just really making sure that you're listening to them. Right. So these are some, example scripts that, might be helpful, or just some different examples of what you might say for like a healthy boundary. Um, so I don't like when you don't clean up after yourself in the kitchen. Can you make sure to clean up after yourself going forward? Right. So really being direct about what you don't like and also what you need, right? You need them to clean up after themselves because you feel like you don't have to, clean up after that other person. So this might come up with a roommate situation. So just really being clear about, what's happening, the facts, and what you need in that moment. I won't be able to hang out on Friday. I'm overwhelmed with homework and need to catch up. Right. So saying no directly, um, letting them know how you feel using I statements, and giving them a reason, if you feel like that is something you want to do. I can't loan you any money at this time. Is there any other way that I can support you? Right. So maybe that's helping them find some other resources that they can obtain money from. But letting them know that you're not able to do that. Right. And that's okay. Right. Any questions so far? Okay. Coming to an end. Yeah.
When you're not trying to like make most of them on boundaries, like what is like the decision like not having president, like they can
Yeah. Yeah. Really great question. I think in those instances, there's not a conversation that's being had, right? It's a one-way conversation and they're not being receptive. And there's only so much that we can do. And I think in those moments, really recognizing what your needs and wants are in that moment and your goal too, right? And so if your goal in that conversation is to articulate your needs and wants and your limits, and they're not receptive to that, then I think it's time to really think about, um, how do I want to interact with this person going forward, right? Do I want to continue to allow them to overstep and disrespect my boundaries? Um, which can be really hard, especially with loved ones, right? Sometimes we'll have a loved one that just does not get it and they're not hearing it. So I think at those times, you might have to maybe set more physical boundaries. So that might be maybe limiting phone calls. It might be only communicating via text. Um, but even if boundaries are being crossed during those times, right? Maybe you're being um, called names in text messages, then it's like, okay, well, now I can't communicate via text, right? And so you might want to limit communication. Um, yeah, if it's someone you're dating, you might want to think about, is it conducive to the relationship that you want going forward? If it's not, um, then you might want to think about, yeah, what the future looks like with this person. Right? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions, comments? It's a really good question. I think those, earlier we had talked about those different categories of boundaries. And sometimes the person isn't receptive, or they might maybe respect the boundaries for a period of time and then maybe stop. So then it's like, okay, now I have to kind of articulate it again. And then knowing your threshold, right? There's no right or wrong answer. Some people maybe have like, they might do 3 strikes, you're out, they might be a little more rigid around it. Some people might give a lot of people grace, than others might, right? We all have different thresholds of what we want to tolerate. And if you're to the point where you're like maybe so burnt out, or maybe been taken advantage of so many times to where you've reached your boiling point and you're like, I can't do this anymore, right? Um, and I think oftentimes that's where kind of, you know, people kind of, their pattern of setting boundaries. And so hopefully we can get to a place where you can kind of notice the buildup before it gets to that breaking point. Of saying, okay, this is not how I want it to go, right? This is not how I want to be treated. And this is not something I'm going to tolerate for a long period of time. Right. And so now I want to just talk about the counseling center and the services that we offer. And so we offer individual counseling, which is short term, and problem focused. And so sessions are typically every 2 to 3 weeks. We also offer group counseling. We do prevention and outreach, which is, yeah, we do a lot of events such as these webinars, and we have a speed friending event this evening. We also do urgent services and crisis response. So if you're feeling in crises, like if you are going to harm yourself or harm someone else, or just really feeling unsafe, or maybe going through a recent traumatic event, you can walk into the counseling center during 8 to 5, and we can get you to talk to someone. Consultation and referral services and psychiatric service referrals. So what we can't offer is long-term therapy, and then conditions requiring specialized treatment. So we do have, which is on our website, maybe some things that we wouldn't be able to support and treat, but we do offer resource coordination where we can kind of get you connected to other resources in the community. And then we also don't provide academic advising. And so, yeah, this is how you can connect with us. You can call us, you can go online if you want to schedule a consultation. And we have slots on there, so you just fill out paperwork, and then the consultation consists of like a 20 to 30-minute phone call with one of our counselors. And that's where we just kind of see what's happening for you and see if the counseling center is a good fit. If not, we'll work with you to kind of create a list of referrals and resources for you. So yeah, this is our information. We're on IG, Twitter, Facebook. Check us out in all of our events. That's all I had for today. So thank you all for participating and listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right.